Gosh darn it, Duran, you're a loose cannon. Turn in your gun and shield, you're off the case.
Fine, but I'm solving the murder myself. Hey there, fellow maker. Welcome to the shop. We have a guest today. It's Bjorn.
Hello.
Bit of a specialist in the cosplay world. He works with leather. So you were at TwitchCon. I was there. I saw you there. Your entire outfit was made from leather.
That's true. Absolutely true.
Including how many creepy faces on your cape?
It was like 50 or 60.
Yeah. And these are faces of people we know, right?
Most of them, yeah.
Yep. It was spectacular. Your wealth of knowledge when it comes to this humble material dwarfs mine. And you currently still live in the area, so we dragged him down here so that you can spread the knowledge. So the project today, I obviously already have a holster for my Han Solo blaster that I made a while ago that you were scrutinizing earlier.
Guilty.
This is my Bladerunner blaster I made this last year, and I want to make an under-the-shoulder holster for it. So we're going to get jumping on that, but before we dive in, I'd like to know a little more about the material, leather,
Yeah.
and the massive bucket of tools you brought with you. Specifically, the basic tools that you need just to get started. Whee! That's a big piece of leather.
So of all of the different cuts of leather, this particular one is what's called a double shoulder. So they take the cow, if this is still part of the cow, they cut it horizontally across the back so that both shoulders up forward to the neck are here. This is the neckline. You can kind of see how it gives that kind of U shape. Over here we've got one leg, over here we've got another leg, and then behind here are what are called the bends of the leather. Different cuts of leather have different names, and they all have different properties and different uses. So this is a double shoulder that we'll be using today.
So what kind of leather is this? If you're going to go buy it, what would you ask for?
Yeah, so this is what's called vegetable tanned leather, and the reason that it's called vegetable tanned leather is because the chemicals that are used in the tanning process to take it from a skinned hide to a stable, workable product are vegetable tannins, often oak or pine or a number of others.
Locally, we have McPherson's leather to get raw. This is raw leather, not raw in the sense that it hasn't been processed, but raw in the sense that it hasn't been, no one's done any work to it.
Correct, yeah,
but
unfinished.
Right, but you could go, it's very common to go to a secondhand store and buy like an old leather skirt or jacket.
The difference is that veg tan is the stuff that you can wet form. So if you're looking to make like a fitted mask or wet formed holster or fitted armor, those kinds of things that need complex shapes, then this is what you'll need to do that. Most clothing is what's called chrome tanned leather, which are tanned using chromium salts and other chemicals. It's faster and cheaper to produce. It's also got different properties. So you want to make sure that you're getting something that is right for whatever project you're doing.
But if you're going to wet mold a holster, you got to get this stuff.
Got to get veg tan.
Okay, good. Good to know. I will say also, usually the McPherson's or there's a Tandy near us, they have a scrap bin as well, too. So if you're looking for this stuff, only you don't want to buy a giant piece for a lot of money, you can get a scrap to play with.
That's a great way to start.
But we're going to start with this giant piece of leather for our holster, and then we're going to need some tools to work on it. So Bjorn brought us some of his wonderful tools, and we're thinking this is probably everything we'll need for this particular project. And it's not a ton of stuff.
Over here we've got some double cap rivets. These are specifically double cap because they've got this kind of rounded head on both sides of them. A lot of rivets will have a cap on one side, and then it'll just be kind of a flared out end on the other end. I like these because they give a nice clean polished finish on both sides, inside and out. I'm a huge fan of clean and polished everywhere you go. Next, we've got a hole punch. This is a pliers style hole punch. So the nice thing about this is that it's very quick and easy. If you've got a bunch of holes that you have to punch, the challenge is that you're limited by the depth of the throat of these pliers. So if you've got anything that is more than, say, 1.5 inches from the edge of your piece, you end up needing to use something kind of like this.
Yeah, so this is actually the cheaper option. It's a hole punch that has replaceable tips for different diameters there, but you just whack it with a hammer. Anywhere you can put a hammer, you can use this thing. You don't have to worry about the choke of your tool. So I have both for when I need them.
Perfect.
Also, and this travels between all these tools. These are all really great on other things like foam.
Foam, paper, cardboard, pretty much anything you build with, if it works with that, then it works with that. And I know that's a silly statement to make, but it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about because they buy it at a woodworking shop or a leatherworking shop or whatever, and their brain just immediately defaults to that's what it's used for.
This looks like a compass.
It is, and it's so much more. This is probably my favorite leatherworking tool that I own, and I use it for many, many, many things. So your challenge today is going to be anytime you think we could use this, I want you to point it out.
Okay, cool. Actually, you watching at home, if you can think of a creative use for a compass, let us know in the comments below. So many uses. All right, let's cruise down the line. What else we have
Next
here?
up, we've got a strap end punch. As the name implies, you use this to punch out the ends of your straps to give them a nice finish.
I like when the name of a tool describes exactly what it does.
It's handy, right? We've got some beeswax used for some edge coating, edge finishing. We've got what's called a bone folder. It's literally just a stick of bone that is used for shaping, molding. We've got an edge beveler that kind of trims off the edge of a piece of leather to take it from what would normally be a 90-degree angle at the edge to kind of a rounded profile. Makes it a little bit more comfortable against the skin and a little bit better finished. We've got a fancy edge finisher, an edge burnisher. This again helps to finish the edges so that they're nice and clean.
You brought a phaser?
It is indeed not a phaser. No. Sorry, but good try. This is just a box knife, a regular box knife. That's what I use to cut 95% of my leather work with. Of course, we've got a handy dandy measuring tool. I really like these because they're useful for going around corners and that kind of stuff. We've got some wool daubers. This is literally just a tuft of wool wrapped in some wire so that you can apply finishes, dyes, antiques, that kind of stuff. We've got a marking pen, and then some of the liquid stuff. So this is an antique paste. This is what we're gonna be using to color our leather. We've got Tokonol, which is a Japanese leatherworking product that is for edge finishing and burnishing. And then we've got Pro Resist, which is a finish coat, waterproofer, water resistor, and general sealant.
Fantastic. We have our material, we have our tools. Why don't we dive into the project?
Let's get going.
All right. Actually, before we get started, I got a care package from Chris. You know who you are, from Tandy in Detroit. Thank you, buddy, for sending us some of our own tools. I don't know what a lot of these are, so let's take a quick moment to discover.
We'll walk you through it, absolutely.
This looks like some of the punchy, what would you call this, stamping?
Those are stamps. Yep.
Stamps that you
And a
have
swivel knife.
That you have a million of, and a swivel knife and a stand for that.
The other thing that's cool is it comes with a stand so that as you collect more, you'll be able to kind of build out your tool set.
Right, you don't have to just stuff them in a pouch like I have. Another tool holder?
Speaking of building out the tool set, another tool.
Another tool holder, great. This looks like your punch. Fantastic. And then these, what were those?
Those are edge bevelers. So again, used for rounding off the edges of cut leather.
Very cool. This, I have a smaller one of these.
Yeah, this is a burnisher designed to go into some sort of a rotary tool like a Dremel or a Fordham, something like that, used for finishing edges.
So I could chuck it right up in here and
Exactly, exactly.
this looks like a larger one.
It is, that's exactly what that is. That's usually gonna go to like a bench grinder,
Yeah.
something like that.
Or I could put this in my drill press maybe.
Yeah, yep.
We've got a handful more other stuff here. We've got some really cool scissors.
Some shears.
So yeah, awesome stuff. Thank you again, Chris, for sending us the tools. We will put them to good use.
Heck yeah.
Okay, let's put them to good use on our project.
Let's go.
So our holster has two main parts. The actual holster that holds the pistol, and then the straps that would wrap around my body.
Absolutely.
And we're gonna start with the holster, and you've got some paper here to make a template.
Yes, so I start all of my templates with cardstock. It's something that isn't expensive, so I don't have to worry about cost as I'm going through multiple iterations as I'm drafting templates. To start out with most holsters, I like to get kind of a rough idea of the shape of the gun. And so I'm just gonna take a pen and just give kind of a rough outline, and that gives us kind of a general shape. So this is basically gonna be one of our sides. We're gonna end up having a front, a back, and two sides, basically, as far as the measurements go. I can just roll this up on its end, and it doesn't need to be super exact. And then I'm just gonna continue drawing my template so that I know kind of an approximation of where things are. So because this is as broad as it is, normally guns are significantly narrower at the bottom of the barrel. For this one, I'm gonna end up adding probably, I'll say 3/4 of an inch to an inch to either side of this so that we end up with a little bit of extra material so that we can work from there. So I'm just gonna take each side of this, basically do the equivalent of adding seam allowance, but just to cover up this extra thickness of the gun. that counts for the actual size and shape of the gun, and then I'll add probably a 1/2 inch or so of seam allowance on top of that. So this gives us just, again, a rough idea of what we're looking at for our template.
We can make some decisions here too, like is the tip of the barrel going to stick out of the end of the holster, and how much of the rear of the gun is going to be included as well.
Great point. Yeah. So depending on what you're looking for, whether you want it to be a historical Old West or whether you want it to look particularly aggressive and threatening, you know, there's a lot of different elements that subtly change the look of a holster. So we templated this so that we have our barrel covered. If we wanted to leave the tip of the barrel exposed, we can just cut off the bottom 3/4 of an inch of this, and that's going to leave just the tip of the barrel exposed, which changes kind of the feel of the thing.
Yeah. I'm making a couple decisions about this just because I want a cool holster. I'm not trying to replicate the one from the movie. So we're just playing fast and loose with everything, which I think is fun.
I'm going to start by just giving us a roughly straight line there. And then we'll take that. Again, just super rough here, but this will give us kind of a general idea of what we want to look at. And since these are supposed to be, give or take, mirrored, I'm just going to fold this in half so that we can work along one edge, and that automatically mirrors it to both sides. Makes things a little bit faster when you're potentially going through multiple iterations when you're working on a bunch of different stuff at once. For this one, we are going to leave the whole bottom edge of that exposed. So that gives us this, which in theory should wrap fairly well around here. Because we've got all of these lines marked, this one is where our bottom edge is. So I'm gonna kind of crease there, so that we've got things kind of moving in towards the center. Because we've got this thinner bit here, it's going to be a little bit narrower up here, so I probably didn't need to add quite as much of a margin, but I'm always a huge fan of erring on the side of having too much material as opposed to too little. And that becomes especially important once you get into actually using the leather.
If you make the piece a little bit too big and you end up cutting off some scraps, you waste those scraps. But if you have to cut the whole thing again, you waste a lot of leather.
Yep. So there you can start to see that we've got this kind of chamber formed. So now that sits just like that. If we were to take this line that we've got as one of our stitch lines or rivet lines, then that works. This side, because this is a little bit narrower, we've got a little bit more room than I would suggest or I would be comfortable with. So I would maybe even say bring this edge in 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch. This is exactly why I like to template with cardstock, is because I can play around with it. If I need to tape an extra piece on and expand, I can do that. If I need to trim off, I can do that. So let's bring this edge in about 1/2 inch total. So if we do 1/4 inch off of each side, that'll bring things in a little bit further, just so that things are a little bit better fitted.
Cool, our pattern looks like it's just about ready to go. We added a little more room here to make it look pretty. We got our leather.
So up next, we are going to go ahead and transfer our pattern to the leather. We'll get things cut out, and then we will go from there.
Fantastic. Is there a spot, should we just use like an edge here?
So that's actually a great question that is way more important than you might think. So over here on the leather, you notice how there's all of these wrinkles and cracks and that kind of stuff? This is towards the belly of the cow. Okay. This stuff has way more stretch to it. And because of that, it ends up being much less stable. So we actually want to do something that's closer to the top of the shoulder or the back. When it comes to leather, the center right along the spine is the strongest, most stable leather. As you work your way towards the edges, you get more of this stretchy, wrinkly stuff. So when you're working on a big project, you'll actually want to cut off right about here so that you end up working with stable stuff. There's a difference between the actual piece of leather and what's usable yield. And this is still usable for certain things. You just want to pick projects that are good for that kind of a thing. So then we're going to go ahead and cut that. I'm going to go ahead and cut that out.
Sure. And again, this is just a box cutter. Like, you don't need a fancy pants knife.
One of the most important things is just make sure that your blade stays perfectly vertical so you don't end up with angles where you don't want them.
And keep the knife very sharp. So similar to foam, I would start at an intersection like that and cut away from it.
And just like foam, leather is an abrasive material, so it will chew through blades pretty fast. This is called the grain side, and then the fuzzy side is called the flesh side. The reason that they look different, this is the side that faces outside of the cow. This is the side that faces towards the meat of the cow. And so this, when they skin the cow, the leather is like more than 1/4 inch thick. It's beefy stuff, pun intended. And when they process it, they send it through these great big, like 9-foot wide, 10-foot wide knives that split off an underlayer and the top layer. This would be what's referred to as like a top grain leather, and then what gets split off of it has the fuzzy side on both sides, and that's where you get things like suede and that kind of stuff. So the majority of the strength of leather is towards the top of the surface, so suede is not something that you want to make like a load-bearing belt out of. That's something that you want the majority of that leather strength in it. This top surface will take stamping, tooling, that kind of stuff, whereas suede does not. So next we're going to bevel our edges. That kind of rounds off the corners.
So we need a tool. That must be what this is for.
Not quite.
What do we need?
Good try though.
What do we need?
So we're actually going to use what is called an edge beveler.
Oh, right.
Remember that thing that we talked about a little earlier? It's just a matter of holding it with a little bit of pressure on your index finger, holding it at a consistent angle so the height of the back of the tool stays the same, and then you're just running it along the edge to pull off what I like to refer to as leather spaghetti. That just kind of rounds off those edges so that they are nice and soft. And we're only going to do this for the top side for our sides, and then for the bottom and the top of this, we're going to do both sides since those aren't going to be up against each other, whereas this side, they're going to be butted up against each other, and we want those to line up. Yeah, one of the nice things about these is that in order to strop them as well as sharpen as most people will ever do to them, you basically just take a piece of leather lace that is close to the width of your edge beveler, and you just put some stropping polish on it, some rouge.
Like a board with some leather
like 5 or
straps
6
on it.
widths.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I can't quite reach in there with that tool, so I'm just gonna do it with an X-Acto. And you could do all this with an X-Acto.
Absolutely.
It would not be as fun as this tool.
And that's one of the things that's true of most leatherworking stuff. Just because there is a specific leatherworking tool for that job, it usually just makes it faster and more consistent. It's not what makes it possible.
This edge here has not been beveled, and then this edge over here has been beveled. We're looking pretty good so far. You had mentioned earlier about the different thicknesses of leather, and for a holster, this might be a little thin.
Yeah, so normally you'll want like 8 to 10 ounce. This is like 5-6 ounce. So we're a little bit on the light side. We have the option of lining it, and we could double up on this, or we've got some suede that we could use. Totally up to you.
Lots of options. I think we're gonna roll with this right now. I'm not gonna wear this thing every day, so I'm not too worried about durability.
Sounds like a plan. We'll go with that. Next step, we are going to figure out and lay out our assembly.
Cool. Can I use this yet?
Yes, actually.
Yes!
Let's see how you think you're going to use that.
And this is an educated guess, is that we need to figure out where the rivets are going to go along the edge.
Yep, absolutely. So whether you're using stitching, whether you're using rivets, the question is, how do you want to line these up? And this is the majority of the uses that I use the compass for, or the wing dividers, is for measuring and spacing things. So for this one, we can set it to, if we were to do a super close to our edge stitch line, I could just mark that there. If we're doing rivets, we're going to want it to be a little bit wider, so if we wanted to mark where our rivets go, we could put it like there and then mark out where each of our rivets go. And then you can also use this to mark spacing between your rivets. So if you draw yourself a continuous line, then you can use this to set, well, I want 3/4 of an inch between my rivets. You set to roughly 3/4 of an inch, and then you can just follow that line, and that gives you perfect spacing no matter where you are along the project.
Awesome. Let's do that.
So we've got our rivet head is here, so we want to make sure that we are giving ourselves enough room so that once we smash these rivets together, that we're going to have room on both sides, that it's not overhanging our edges. So if we do that, then we can just mark, and again, it's just kind of a matter of marking a border line, and then it's up to you whether or not you want to continue that line up here. So that's roughly center to there. So we'll put one towards our corner here. I'm just going to press in there so that sits like that. And then let's shoot for Again, roughly somewhere between 1/2 and 3/4 of an inch, so that way we can mark from there. And I'm just going to kind of ballpark the center line for that, so that then we have marked where we want our holes to go. And then that one will decide what we want to do there. And this is the rotary head of this thing. There's 6 different options. You tend to want to go one size smaller than whatever it is that you're using, because leather has a little bit of stretch to it. All right, so if you want to go ahead and punch those.
I do.
Or do you want me to?
No, I want to. Yeah, as if you probably have had a lifetime of experience of punching holes.
One thing I will say is the plier grip hole punches, when you're working with armor leather, you build a lot of hand strength really quickly.
I can imagine.
A massive pain, but then once you actually build the hand strength, then it's nice, because it's just not an issue. So then, what we can do is we can just line these up.
And punch more holes?
You can just
I can punch right
using that as your reference.
The Han Solo blaster, I stitched this part, so that's why this time I want to try these rivets. This is great. Could you come and hold stuff for me whenever I need it?
Absolutely. I'll just send you a bill. So what I like to do here is just to make sure that our edges are lined up, we're going to grab a handful of these and go ahead and just thread those through so we can see how clean our edges are. So we're pretty close. Do you think you want to do a border stamp?
Yeah, a little bit of decoration? Yeah, for sure.
So next up, we're going to go ahead and mark and cut our borders so that we can do a little bit of fancy edge stamping.
And which tool do we need for that?
I'm actually impressed. We'll start with that. Yay! And then we'll move on to the swivel knife. As you can tell, is a knife that swivels. Go ahead and take that, make sure that you've got it spaced the same as the one that we already did.
Looks correct.
Perfect, and we'll go ahead and do the other side, just so that way we make sure that they are the same.
One of these will be in the back, so are we gonna still decorate the back?
You don't have to, but...
You know what? It would be good practice.
As I said,
I already screwed up.
So with the wing dividers...
Oh, perfectly straight line.
It blew me away when I first started using these, how much practice it actually took for me to get functionally competent with it. And it really is just a matter of practice. You'll get there.
First try.
These are adjustable height. So the stem here, you can rotate this whole thing so that it goes there. I have mine pretty much at the top. And then this rotates so that it can go shorter or longer. You'll kind of get a feel for where you want yours to sit. A lot of it's based on the size of your hand. Since I have giant bear paw hands, I like mine at the top. Which knuckle or which segment of your finger you rest on is 100% a matter of preference. I know people that do first, second, and third. Again, it's just a matter of how you feel you have the most control. I don't think that would work very well.
Go ahead.
Its index finger sits in the saddle, and then your thumb and your middle finger are the ones that are going to be doing most of the work. The easiest way that I find to kind of rotate this is whichever side you want it to go to, pull with that finger. So it's not necessarily a push and pull. I find that I get much more graceful curves if I just pull with one side and then let the other side kind of follow.
And you're scoring the surface. You're not cutting all the way through it.
Yeah, so this is cutting into the surface, but it's not going all the way through. And this is a brand new blade, so it's actually, it should probably be stropped. That's why it kind of pulled a little bit as it went.
So I'm cutting with this
Correct,
part.
yeah. So you'll kind of lean the tool so you're just working with the corner that's furthest away from your finger, and then go slow, give it whatever time it needs, and the goal is to shoot for between 1/3 and halfway through the leather as just kind of a ballpark. You'll get a feel for how light or hard you want to cut based on the project.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
That wasn't so hard.
So next we'll go ahead and spray the leather with a little bit of water so that we can bevel things. So you want to do a misty spray. Go ahead and douse it fairly well, and then we'll let it sit for a minute, let it absorb in. You're good there? So you can see that it sucks up that moisture. If you're using thicker leather, you'll want to give it a little bit more moisture. If you're using thinner leather, then it's going to take a lot less. So we'll give this another minute or so. Once it starts to get back to close to its natural color, that's when we're going to know that we are right where we want to be with this.
So using water to soften this works on the veg tan leather.
Correct, yeah. So chrome tan won't work, all of those kinds of things. This is specifically for vegetable tanned leather.
Yeah, so this is, I think this is oil tanned. And the water just beads up on the surface.
And even if it doesn't bead up, you're still not going to be able to stamp into it.
Right. Now I have to put that away wet. All right. It's been a couple minutes. It's starting to dry a little bit.
Yeah.
I also grabbed a big piece of plastic, but you said anything heavy would be useful as a work surface when you're doing this kind of tooling, like a big piece of rock or...
Yeah, ideally you want to use either like marble or granite, something that is as dense as possible, as weighty as possible, because when you're stamping, you're putting energy into the leather and then that transfers through to the work surface. The goal is to minimize bouncing so that we don't end up with an impression, the tool bounces and skips and then hits where we don't want it to be, because that's how you end up with really messy tooling. One of the nice things is that you can go to any local countertop place and they'll have sink cutouts that they don't use that are 1.5 to 2-inch thick granite or marble slabs that they just throw out and usually have to pay people to haul away. So they'll usually give them to you for $5, $10, $15 and you've got a perfect tooling surface.
Now your hammer looks a lot different than my hammer.
That's true.
But this will work, right?
It'll work.
Okay. You hesitated for a moment.
I do, and there's a reason for that, because the rubber mallet has the exact same problem where it'll bounce. So this is a leatherworking maul, and usually I hold it with a pinch right behind the head of the hammer so that this acts as a pivot, so that when I strike the tool, it bounces back up, but then my fingers catch it, which limits kind of its motion, so that if it does try to bounce on me, I'm limiting both the upward and the downward motion. Whereas with a hammer, where you tend to hold it further back on the handle, it's gonna rebound and it's just generally less controlled.
If I'm gonna use this, I might just grip way up on it to hopefully minimize the...
Yep, and that's exactly it is. When you're tooling leather, you wanna tap the tool, not strike it.
Oh, all right.
So this is what's called a beveler. And they come in all sorts of different widths, all sorts of different textures.
Oh, that one has some texture.
This one has a really fine texture and is a little bit steeper. So when you look at the tool, it's got this flat face over here and then it's angled over here. So the goal of this is to basically create a sharp 90-degree angle on one side and then a slanted gradation on the other side, so that it creates the illusion of one edge shifting underneath another edge. It's going to create the look of a second piece of leather that is thicker or wider or on top of this main body. The goal is to kind of walk the tool along.
So you're tapping and moving at the same time.
Yeah, so the goal is to just kind of, as consistently as possible, walk the tool along your line, and you shouldn't be afraid of going back over your lines to clean things up, because it's definitely not fair to expect yourself to get it exactly perfect the first time. I know I don't expect it of myself. So
I mean, honestly, I'm a little disappointed.
You and me both, Bill. This color change is from some of the oils and fats of the leather getting squished to the surface by the compression of the tool. And so it burnishes the leather, which is that kind of color change, which also gives a little bit better visual cue that there's layering going on. It acts as kind of a natural shadowing as you go. Most dyes are translucent rather than opaque, so some of this darker color will still show through after you dye it. And you can go either forward or backwards towards your hand or away from your hand.
All right, everybody, hold on to your butts.
I believe in you, Bill.
That was the weakest tap. Okay.
So one thing that I will say is you want to make sure that your tool is straight this way.
Yep.
You're kind of drifting a little bit, leaning
like
that way.
Cool, perpendicular. The head of this tool is a moving target, so my hand, both hands have to move at the same pace as I swing. So that's interesting. We're getting there. We're seesawing our way around the corner. Okay.
Looks good.
I'm happy with that.
Looks real good.
Stop. Hammer time. I'm sorry, if you weren't born in the 80s, you probably don't know what that means. So this is a newer hammer, and that's an older one, but
Yeah.
they're the same. They look the same at one point.
Yeah, they started out same color handle. They both have this kind of tapered head. This one is a significantly smaller one, so it's not that this one's been used and eventually ground down, but you can actually throw one of these on a lathe and turn it to kind of resurface the hammer.
So this one's darker, and that's all you.
It's a combination of leather tans in the sun, and it tans as it absorbs oils. So as you handle things like leather wallets, holsters, that kind of stuff, they pick up the oils from your skin, and that does kind of burnish and darken it.
Is that leather?
Yeah.
I thought that was wood.
It's a bunch of leather discs that they threw it on a lathe and turned it. So next up, we want to burnish our top and bottom edges. That way we can wait until we've riveted this to do these once we can make sure that they're gonna line up perfectly. We're gonna start with a little bit of this Tokonol burnishing gum, and then we've got a edge slicker. So this stuff is kind of goopy stuff. I don't even know what it's made of, but again, it's a gum tragacanth is kind of the common one that's used by a lot of United States leather workers. Tokonol is, again, a Japanese product. The goal of this is to bind the fibers at the edge of the leather so that they're not all sticking out. Again, leather is made up of a network of fibers, and so by binding them together and then pressing them down, it kind of lays them all flat and allows for a really nice smooth edge. So I'll give that a minute or so to kind of start to firm up, and then we'll go ahead and run along with this. I want to pick which groove is going to basically be the size that fits and then one size up. We don't want there to be a gap between the top and bottom at the center, where if you go with space that's too small, you won't end up getting the flat of the leather. So you want to be a little bit on the larger side of that. And so we can see that this, we get this really, really nice feel, that difference.
So shiny. I like that.
And so you can kind of get into the corners here. It's a combination of pressure and heat, so basically all of the parts of friction that lay those fibers together, that then whatever your burnishing compound kind of grabs into and then lays down. It's because of the Tokonol that we're getting this really nice, shiny finish. It's a little bit more challenging if you're just using water. There are a lot of incredibly skilled leather workers that do just use water, but it's a little bit more finicky to get it to a really nice polished edge. This will still take color, so you can dye through this, and then once we do our final everything, we'll run over with a sealer that will actually make it so that it won't absorb anything else from there. Yeah, you just want a little bit of pressure, but it's more about generating a small level of friction than anything else.
So this is one of the ones we got from Chris here, and it spins, and I imagine that you don't have to push hard, just that friction is what you want to get from it. I see. This seems like the civilized way to do it here.
There's very strong thoughts that some people have about what is the quote-unquote right way to do it. As far as I'm concerned, if it works, it's the right way.
This pointy part here, you really do kind of need a hand tool to get in there.
Yeah, yep.
Like there's always a reason to own one of these.
Mostly because it's fancy and pretty.
It is really, I mean, this one is. This one's amazing. This is way fancier than mine's. I actually jammed this in the drill press, which I learned is a legitimate thing to do. I don't know why it's burned on the bottom there.
It's the friction from the metal plate at the bottom of the drill press.
That's probably exactly what that is.
That's exactly what it is, because my other one that's not as pretty as this one has the exact same thing going on.
So this is the non-slicked edge, and we'll do that later. And then this is when it looks all shiny and burnished.
Nice and pretty.
Yeah.
And this is a thing that a lot of cosplayers and a lot of professional leather workers skip as a step, and then they label it as rustic. A lot of people use it as an excuse to have unfinished things.
I need to start making more rustic foam armor. The next step is stamping.
Yeah, so let's pick a border stamp to use.
Which is great, because I just got some stamps.
We're gonna go ahead and take your pick.
That's a lot more than mine.
Probably want to stick to either this row or this row.
So I want to go with something that looks kind of sci-fi, and I'm feeling like one of these maybe. I like that.
And we can alternate it with something like that just gives a little bit of a dome, kind of a rivety look. We need to moisten the leather, dampen the leather, to get it to be able to take impressions. Adding a little bit of water to it lubricates those fibers so that they're able to move, and then once it dries, they lock back into place, which allows them to keep the shapes that we put into them.
Got my stamp.
Hold up, whoa. Calm yourself.
Hey.
All right, so We need to test on scrap.
Oh,
because
always a good idea.
Before we make a decision that we can't undo, which leather is notorious for.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and mark out where we want our border to be.
And then is there a preferred direction for this? I'm not.
One of the nice things about leatherworking is you can do whatever the heck you want.
Yeah.
What I would suggest is butt it up against your edge. So if pick a line and then go against that line.
Just give it one good whack
Yep. If it's a particularly large stamp, occasionally I'll give it one on one direction and then I'll lean the stamp a little bit different way and then give it a second one.
And whoop. And then I could just like alternate it like this.
Heck
That's
yeah.
pretty cool. Like you could do something like that, have now this sort of radial pattern.
Yep.
That's really cool. So this one that you recommended is dished. So that looks like a rivet, which is cool because if we want this to look more sci-fi.
Yep.
I can even go in and paint that later, I imagine.
Yep, absolutely.
We tried a bunch of different stamps here and had a lot of fun, but then I decided we're gonna go for this guy to go around the edge over here. Did some practices. This is the side we're gonna see, so why don't you do that one?
I got you.
And I'll do the back.
So we're using a little bit heavier maul than we were using before just because this is a fairly large surface area for the stamp and we want to make sure that we're getting nice, deep, clean impressions. When it comes to stamping, start where you want to make sure that things are lined up, things are visually important so that you can make sure that things are nice and crisp and lined up and clean. When it comes to border stamps, geometric stamps, all of that kind of stuff, things can potentially drift as you work. And so making sure that wherever is important is lined up the best is in your best interest. You want to be as consistent as possible with the amount of pressure and make sure that you're lining things up the same way. So if you've got a gap between each of your stamps, try and keep the spacing consistent so that you can see that we're ending up right at our edge like that, as opposed to ending up with like half of a stamp missing.
Very good.
And that's something that you kind of pick up over time.
Yeah, and I noticed that you could come back in, and this will lock back into place.
Yes.
And whack it again if you need to redefine any of those edges.
Yep. Because the leather's still damp, if you flex the leather too much, it will kind of lose some of that definition. If that happens, it's not a big deal. You can usually go back through and clean things up, and then you want to make sure that you're leaving it to dry without any sort of major flexing going on.
I can definitely tell a practiced hand would just be better at getting it closer on the first whack.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it's muscle memory.
Yeah.
You know, when you've done it 1,000 times, then it's gonna kind of line itself up.
Don't hit your finger, hit the tool. It's a pro tip from Bill, me to you. This looks really great. I want to add just a splash more detail. We got some hexagons because that's from the future. I don't want to put a stripe of them across there. You said we should put duct tape on the back of this.
Yeah, so
to keep it from stretching.
one of the things that is kind of a problem when you heavily stamp leather is that because you are compressing the leather, when you stamp into it, it squishes the leather, but because leather deforms plastically when it's wet, it squishes downwards and then out as well. So you end up with a center part that's stretched and then the outside is stable where you've got your borders. And so you end up with kind of a dished thing that starts to dome on you. So by adding a little bit of tape to the back of it, it holds that fiber network stable, adds a little bit of extra strength to it so that instead of squishing outwards, it stays put and prevents that warping. There are some projects like if you're making shoulders for armor where you want it to dish, you can use that to your favor. But for something like this, we want to be able to wet form it later. And so we're going to go ahead and just leave the stamping where we want it.
I'm going to use some painter tape to mark out where we're going to put our stamps, and then we'll start hammering. While we're working on those stamps, I want to take a moment to thank our patrons over at patreon.com/punishedprops. It's thanks to you and your financial support that we're able to work in this awesome, gigantic shop with some of our friends on these really fun projects. If you'd like to jump in on the fun, consider tossing us $1. You get access to things like behind the scenes vlogs every single week, early releases on all of our build videos, and extra credit videos for those build videos. Extra credit videos are where we take a dive into the project once it's done to discuss some of the finer points of the build. Sometimes we get a ton of extra footage when we're filming, like we did here with Bjorn Bjorn, and that footage, instead of making it into the main video, will get put into the extra credit video accessible to patrons. So thank you so much for your support. I hope you like those extra bits of goodness we've made for you. You can head on over to patreon.com/punishprops to give us a little bit of support. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the build.
Next step is we're going to have to figure out where we want our rivets to go for the back, for our snaps.
To attach to me.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is we're going to build the harness so that you'll have kind of a placard under your arm.
Oh, awesome.
So that way it can just snap into place if you want to swap that out for an ammo thing. If you want to swap that out for a pouch, then you've got options. It's just kind of a modular system.
Great, let's go get my analog. So this is what the holster's kind of going to look like when it's done, and it's going to go under my shoulder there.
Yep, and it's just where you're comfortable, how you want to draw.
And I also don't want the gun to fall out.
Yeah.
Roughly a 45-degree angle,
Okay.
I think that looks. 45, Britt, does that look? All right, great.
Perfect. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and mark.
Like there and there, kind of. About like that, and I think that's pretty good.
Go ahead and grab the hole punch right over there.
Oh, no.
So I would go from this side.
Oh, that does reach. Okay, cool.
Yeah. I was gonna say, if you're close, you can bend it. You'll want to be careful about how you take those liberties.
Yep.
But you can get away with it most times.
Next is snaps, which need to
Just
go right there.
stop.
Okay.
Just.
Oh my! What is
So
that?
this is our rivet press.
Well, now, whenever I've done snaps or rivets or anything, I just whacked it with a hammer. Perfectly
works.
acceptable.
Absolutely
but
works.
you happen to have this wonderful.
I will say, I am garbage at that.
Yeah?
So I have a machine that helps me.
This is the stem, and that gets pressed through the back of it, like that. So it looks like so. And then that goes on top of it. Oh, that rests on there.
Underneath
Very good,
it,
in the tool. And then the snappy part, that kind of goes on there. And then that goes in our tool on that little stem. And then with my, oh yeah, much easier. Look at that. There we go. And those are on there pretty much permanently.
Those are permanent.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you had to take these off, you could drill that out.
Absolutely.
Which
Just like a rivet. It's
like
basically
I've
a
had
rivet.
to do in the past. So now we got our rivets to put the edge together.
Yep. So we've got a handful of the stems and caps.
So this is going through there, and then one of these will go on there. And it's nice that they snap in place,
Absolutely.
and then you can line it up.
Well, and this is super great for armor and stuff as well, because you can just snap them together and then they just stay in place.
Awesome.
That's going to be our anvil. The lever means that they just shift straight up and down. So you're pretty much guaranteed a perfect set every time. The bottom side of the rivet slides into this. It's got this collar that also kind of pops up and down so that when this goes, it'll actually press down and set. This top section has a little bit of a divot in it right there, so that this will sit on the top of one of these caps, which again gives it kind of a registration to lock into place. At this point, you lock in the bottom, you lower the handle just a little bit, lock in the top, and then just press, and you are off to the proverbial races. It's super nice. Basically, if you're ever doing anything where you need to set a boatload and a half of these rivets, suddenly the press starts to pay for itself in the time that you're saving, just because rivets are a time-consuming process, and I just set 9 in about 15-20 seconds.
That looks really nice there. Now, the earlier you said we could true this up.
Yep, so we'll grab a bit of a sanding disc.
Yeah,
if you've got a belt sander, if you've got...
Sanding, I am very comfortable with sanding. So let's see, I got my rotary tool here with just a sanding bit, and
Nice.
I can sand those flush.
And you'll see the moment when it gets flush, because it'll suddenly look really nice. And then we'll be able to go back through and slick those.
Just like that.
Yep.
Probably bevel these edges
Yep.
again.
Depending on how much sanding you have to do, sometimes you do have to rebevel. Also make sure that you hit this front corner,
Oh, look at that.
just so you can kind of true things up a little bit. The difference between super basic leatherwork and mind-blowingly good leatherwork is more often than not how many steps they do of finish and polish. And so now that you've got the couple of layers together, you'll start to see where if you do too small of a size on the edge slicker, you end up missing part of the flat. So just play around with which size of that you're using, and you'll figure out which one works best.
Now is the time for color.
Indeed. So while there are literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of options for dyes, paints, antiques, that kind of stuff, we're going to opt for some Fiebing's dark brown antique paste. This just happens to be what I have handy for today. So we're just going to go ahead and grab some of this.
That looks gross.
It is pretty gross. And we're just going to smear it. We're going to be super heavy-handed on this.
Yeah, we are. Look at that. It's like weathering a prop, though. Like you brush all this stuff on, and you're like, oh no, what have I done?
That's pretty true.
Yeah.
And so with the antique, we're going to leave it on for just a little bit, and then we're going to take a paper towel.
This is just like weathering.
And
oh, look at that. This is leather weathering.
That's exactly what this is. That's why it's called antique, is because it has kind of a multi-tonality that it does. The deep spots, the stuff that you've cut or tooled or stamped, tends to hold more of it, and it gives it that weathered, antiqued look. That's exactly what this stuff is for. Depending on how long you leave it on, it will absorb and hold more of that color. So if you want it to be darker, then we can leave it on for longer. If you want it to be where it's at,
this looks pretty good the way it is, I think.
So we'll go ahead and just hit it. And again, I want to overlap both the new stuff and the old stuff so that I have kind of a transition area. So there. And again, the goal is just to see if we can get things to match up as well as possible color-wise. So that's pretty good. Depending on how you're feeling, some people will leave the inside of it undyed, unantiqued. Some people will kind of lightly hit it. Some people will line it with a different color of leather. There's all sorts of different options. It just kind of depends on how you feel.
We decided that we should wet form it, which we could have done before the antiquing.
Yep. Not going to be the end of the world. We may have to re-antique it because the antique is a water-based thing.
The prop I wrapped up in cling wrap, and it won't get wet.
Perfect.
It won't get stained.
Yep.
So we're good to go.
That'll protect it well. Do you want to give that a test fit and make sure that we're at least on the right track and see that it's...
Like we are.
Yeah, it's snug, which it should be.
That's what we want it. Yep.
And it looks like it wants to fit right in there.
All right, so we've got a bowl of water here. When it comes to wet forming, you want to use room temperature water. If you use warm or hot water, you'll be able to get more significant contours and more significant shaping going on, but it will also kind of shrink and warp the leather a little bit as it dries. So just be aware that you kind of have to be careful with that. So you can kind of feel that, how it's
quite soggy.
Very, very malleable. I've given that just a little bit of time to set in. Some of our antique is pulling off of it. Again, that's fine. Go ahead and slot that in where we need. And let's set that so that we've got the tip of that just kind of poking through. And this is where we'll use this guy. This is what's called a bone folder. And we're basically just gonna find our contours and press along so that we can figure out how this needs to get shaped.
Yeah. So you're using the form of the prop as a brace to press against to create the form on the leather.
So we can feel that there's a kind of a knob there.
Yep. That iconic weird knob on the side of the Bladerunner gun that I have no idea what it's there for. This would be tough to do with a prop made out of like EVA foam.
Yes.
Because it would compress as you push into it. So a rigid prop would be good.
Yeah, a lot of times people will make either a wooden form of something like that, or you can 3D print with thick walls. If you were to go with a 2 or 3 times what you would normally print at for wall thickness, you're usually okay. Another thing is up here, since we want to make sure that the gun doesn't fall out, we're going to wrap there's a little bit of a knob here. I'm going to kind of push this down around the back of it so it has a little bit of a flare here, and then I'm going to pull out here so it flares out here so that this part will kind of clasp it into place and just kind of hold things. Some people will use like a vacuformer to do this, and I've seen some really, really nice results that way.
Boy, this looks really fantastic.
It's getting there.
This has to dry?
Yes, so we'll leave this off to the side. While we're doing that, we'll go ahead and whip up our harness. So we'll go ahead and grab your double.
Analog, yeah. The blaster's going to go here.
Yep.
And we want a panel for that to snap to.
Yes.
Or whatever other attachment I want to hide under there.
Yep, we're making that a little bit modular for you.
And then there's going to be a back plate sort of thing.
Yep.
And then some straps. And we'll have them along both arms, like so. So we have to cut some straps and some panels. And you've already patterned them. How about that?
So there's one of them. The other ones can basically just be rectangles and straps. We'll use a tool called a strap cutter that is literally designed for purpose cutting straps. Makes things really quick, really easy, and let's jump to it.
We are just about wrapped up and ready to try this thing on. We made this little plate here to snap this onto, but what we found was that the blaster is actually too heavy and it was pulling it down. So you made another panel that works better.
Yeah, so we just widened things out in both directions a little bit, and instead of going with 2 snaps so that it would end up pivoting, we ended up with 4 snaps so that it's got a little bit of support in all directions so that if it tries to lean, it's got something stopping it.
Yeah, so we can snap these. And the snaps are so that we could put a different thing here if we wanted to.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we could have just riveted this on permanently. But that's on there. I don't need this anymore, and I think it's time to try it on.
Let's give it a shot.
This is a size adjustment with this snap here, so hopefully this is the right size. And I think it just goes on like a backpack, pretty much, like so. Yeah, stylish and comfortable.
Heck yeah.
And then now this fella can go in,
Just
like that, up top. Yeah!
Nicely done.
That was great. Bjorn, I feel like a certified badass wearing this thing. This is so cool. So cool. I can just, ready to go. Take out all the replicants. This was a lot of fun. I learned a ton.
Good.
And I also learned that I need one of those, and I need one of those, and I'll take one of everything. I hope you learned something too. Leatherworking is so versatile and so cool, and the skills transfer to so many other places. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
This is so much fun.
Get it?
Blaster. If you're interested in seeing what Bjorn is up to, and you should be, then you're going to want to go check out your Twitch channel, twitch.tv/Bjorn's Workshop. Of course, we'll have a link down below. And then you just got a new gig, didn't you?
I did.
You're moving. You're leaving us.
I'm moving across the country. So normally in the greater Seattle area, moving down to Houston to work with Prince Armory. I'm super excited about it.
You should be.
Most of what I do is kind of fantasy adventure type stuff. LARP stuff, Renaissance Fair type stuff, and he is at the absolute top of that game. And so I'll be apprenticing with him for the foreseeable future. Check out his website, princearmory.com. We will also be starting to stream at twitch.tv/princearmory. Also check out his YouTube. We'll put some links in the bottom for that as well.
Definitely.
Some really awesome armor builds coming at you soon.
I'm personally very excited to see what you start cooking up.
You and me both.
So I'll be following along as well. As you said, we'll have links down below. Thank you again to our patrons for helping support all of this work so that we can come in on a weekend and buy lunch for Bjorn. We had barbecue. It was great.
It was delicious.
If you'd like to join in on the fun, it's patreon.com/punishprops. If you throw us $1, you get access to a ton of extra content.
Tons of awesome stuff.
It's fantastic. We're going to shoot an extra credit video just after this. A little deep dive into this project. If you want to learn any more about leatherworking, if there's a specific thing that you want to know more about, please let us know in the comments. That'll do it for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll catch you in the next build. All right. So this is the non, what's the
Slicked.
word? Slicked. There we go. Thanks.
Start over.
We'll start over. We're gonna have so many bloopers for this video. It's Bjorn.
Hello.
Bjorn is a specialist. Britt's got the macro lens out now, and I'm all self-conscious about my nasty fingernails. Hi, I'm Bill, and I make stuff for a living.
Hey!
Okay.
Looks good.
I'm happy with that.
Looks real good.
Yeah.
It's okay, that's the back.
Nailed it. It's fine. Judgment-free zone.
It's the backside.
I need to start making more rustic foam armor.
You know what all that material is over there? It's deconstructed armor.
It's true. It's true.
I think a finger would have been easier.
I think you're right, Britt.
I wasn't gonna say it, but